The knock came at 7 in the morning, 3 soft raps against a door that had not been knocked on in years. Rennie Carter sat down her coffee and looked through the window beside it, and there, on her narrow concrete stoop, stood a young man in a charcoal suit that fit him the way good suits fit men who had finally learned how to stand inside one. She did not know him. She thought she did not know him. He was tall and unhurried, and he held a leather folder against his chest the way a boy holds a report card he is proud of, and when she opened the door, he said her name like it was something he had been carrying a long way. What she did not know yet was that the boy on her stoop had once sat at her kitchen table doing long division by the light of a bare bulb, and that the years between then and now had been built on something she gave him for free and never thought to count. For 5 years she had taught the children of Halsey Street whatever they needed taught, and she had never charged a dime math on Mondays and Wednesdays, reading on Tuesdays. Anything at all on the long Saturday afternoons when the library closed early and the mothers worked doubles and the boys would otherwise be on the corner learning the wrong arithmetic. She did it at the kitchen table of a rented half of a duplex with a chalkboard she had bought used for $9 and a coffee can of pencils she sharpened by hand. She did it because somebody had once done it for her and because she could not watch a child fall and pretend the falling was none of her business. If you have ever had one teacher who saw you when no one else did, you already know the kind of woman Renee Carter was, and you might know how rare she is. She was 51 that morning, though she felt older in her knees and younger in the part of her that still believed effort mattered. She had been a school aide for 19 years before the district cut her position to balance a budget, and after that she cleaned offices at night downtown, riding the late bus home with the floor wax still on her hands. The tutoring was the thing she did that no one paid her for, and it was the thing she would have told you if you asked that she was for. The man at the door was named Darnell Brooks. The last time she had seen him he had been 11 years old, missing a front tooth, terrified of fractions, and wearing a coat 2 sizes too big that his grandmother had gotten from a church bin. He had grown up. That was the first thing she understood, standing there in her housecoat with the cold coming in around her ankles. The second thing she understood, slower, was that the grown man was crying. Just a little, just at the corners, the way men cry. When they have practiced not crying for so long that the body finally insists. She stepped back and told him to come in out of the cold before he caught his death, because that was the only thing she knew to say to a child of hers, and he was a child of hers, suit or no suit. He wiped his face with the back of his hand and crossed the threshold, and the leather folder stayed pressed to his chest, as if it held something that might spill. To understand why a man in a $1,000 suit would cry on a stoop in a neighborhood the city had forgotten, you have to go back to the winter. Darnell Brooks was 11, and his mother was gone, and his grandmother was raising 4 grandchildren on a fixed check that ran out before the month did. He'd been failing everything. Not because he was slow, because he was hungry and tired and ashamed, and because a boy who is hungry and tired and ashamed cannot make his eyes hold still on a worksheet long enough to learn what it wants to teach him. His teacher had written him off in the gentle bureaucratic way that schools write children off, with a note in a file and a seat moved to the back. His grandmother, Miss Ada, had heard about a woman 2 streets over who helped children for nothing, and she had walked Darnell to Renee's door on a Tuesday and asked, with the careful pride of a proud woman asking for help, whether there was room at the table for one more. There was always room at the table. That was the rule of the house, the only rule that mattered. Renee fed him a peanut butter sandwich before they did a single problem, because she had learned long ago that a hungry child learns nothing, and a fed child learns the world. She did not make a show of the sandwich. She set it down, the way you set down anything ordinary, on a saucer with a chip out of one edge, and she let him eat it while she pretended to look for a pencil in the coffee can, turning them over with one finger so the sound of it filled the quiet so that he would not feel watched. The kitchen smelled of bread and the wax she used on the linoleum, and the bare bulb above the table buzzed faintly, and for a boy who had spent his days being looked through, the not being watched while he ate was its own small mercy. He finished the sandwich in 4 bites and tried to hide that he had been that hungry, and she let him hide it. Then she sat across from him and asked him to show her what fractions looked like to him, and he drew a pizza cut into pieces with a pencil. He gripped too hard, and she leaned in and looked at it a long moment, longer than he expected, and she said, "Good. That is exactly right. That is the whole secret." And for the first time in months, a teacher had told Darnell Brooks that something in his head was exactly right. He sat up straighter when she said it. She watched him do it and said nothing about it, because a child cannot bear to have his straightening pointed out, but she filed it away the way she filed everything, in the part of her that kept track of which children needed which kind of true thing said to them. Darnell needed to be told he was right, plainly, before he could risk being wrong. Some children were the opposite, all swagger and no foundation, and those she taught differently, slower, letting them be wrong in private until they learned it would not kill them. She had a whole quiet science of it, built over 19 years and never written down anywhere but in her hands and her shoe boxes. She did not call it teaching. She called it paying attention, which is the same thing, and the rarest thing, and the thing the world will not pay you for. He came back the next Tuesday, then Mondays and Wednesdays too, then Saturdays. He was at the table so often that the other children assumed he lived there, and in a way he did. The way a plant lives near a window. Renee never let him feel like charity. She gave him jobs. He erased the chalkboard and sharpened the pencils and counted the younger children in from the stoop, and she paid him in responsibility, which is the only currency a boy that age cannot get enough of. She told him he was smart in a voice that did not allow for argument. She told him that smart was not the prize, that the prize was finishing what you started even when no one was watching, especially when no one was watching, because the world keeps a ledger even when people do not. She said that to him more than once. The world keeps a ledger even when people do not. He did not understand it at 11. He understood it now. Standing in her front room 24 years later with the ledger in his hands. That was getting ahead of the story though, and the story does not move that fast. The story moves at the speed of a life which is slow and full of small things that do not look like anything until later. So go back to the table. Go back to the years of it. Because Darnell was not the only child Renee Carter taught, and the reason the knock on the door meant what it meant has everything to do with the others, the dozens of them, the ones who came and stayed and left and were forgotten by everyone but her. There was Camille, who could not read at 9 and read everything by 11, and now ran the circulation desk at the very library that used to close early on her. There was little Marcus with the stutter, who Renee taught to slow his words down by tapping the table once for each one, and who grew up to be a man who spoke slow and sure in rooms full of fast talkers and was trusted because of it. There was Tasha and the twins whose names rhymed, and the boy everyone called Pun, who never told anyone his real name was Curtis until Renee asked him on his first day and wrote it at the top of his worksheet like it mattered, because it did. She kept their worksheets, she kept all of them, in shoe boxes stacked in the hall closet, years of them, a paper record of every child who had ever sat at her table and tried. She did not keep them out of sentiment. She kept them because a teacher learns to read a child by reading their old work, by seeing where the handwriting steadied and where it shook, and because sometimes a child would come back a month later having forgotten everything and the old worksheet was the map back. The shoeboxes were her filing system and her memory, and though she would never have said so, her treasure. On the hard nights when the cleaning job ran long and the bus did not come and her knees sang their old song, she would let herself into the dark duplex and not turn on the front light. And she would go to the hall closet and take down a box and sit on the floor with her back against the door jamb and read through the worksheets by the streetlight coming through the transom. She would find a page where a child had finally gotten it, where the careful had finally beaten the scared, and she would touch the pencil marks with one finger, and she would remember that she had been of use. That was all she wanted, from a life to have been of use. The boxes were heavier every year, and she liked that they were heavy. A light box would have meant the children had stopped coming, and as long as they kept coming, she could carry any weight at all. Money was always thin. There is no point telling this story as if it were not. The duplex rent went up $40 one year and $60 the next, and the cleaning company cut her hours when they lost a downtown contract. And there was a stretch one February when she ate oatmeal for supper 4 nights running so the children would still have peanut butter and bread on the table when they came. She would stand at the stove, stirring the pot with the wooden spoon worn smooth at the handle, the radiator knocking, the window over the sink gone white with cold at the corners, and she would tell herself oatmeal was a fine supper, that her grandmother had raised 6 on less, and most nights she believed it. She never told the children. A child who knows the teacher is hungry stops being able to learn from her because the worry crowds out the room where the learning goes. So she kept her hunger to herself, the way she kept everything that might have been a burden to a child to herself. And she smiled and she set down the sandwiches and she taught. One Saturday, that February, a boy named Curtis, who noticed things, looked at the bread going onto his plate and then at her empty hands and asked if she was going to eat. She told him she had eaten already, big lunch, could not manage another bite, and she said it so easily he believed her, and she carried the small lie the way she carried everything, without comment, and counted it a good day's work that he had not had to know. If you are still with me, and I hope you are, you already know that a woman like this does not get rich. The world does not, as a rule, pay people for the things that matter most. It pays them for things that can be counted and sold, and a sandwich set down without comment cannot be counted or sold. So Renee Carter grew older at her table, and her hair went grey at the temples first and then everywhere, and her hands grew the small, permanent ache of a woman who had scrubbed a great many floors, and the children grew up and moved on, and most of them did not come back because that is what children are supposed to do. They are supposed to grow up and leave and build lives in the room you made for them. She did not resent it. She had built the room on purpose. A room is for leaving. Darnell left when he was 16, but not the ordinary way. His grandmother got sick, the kind of sick that empties a house, and there was an aunt in another state who could take the younger ones but only had room for so many, and Darnell, the oldest, was sent to live with a cousin 300 miles away whom he barely knew. It happened fast, the way these things happen to poor families with no time for proper goodbyes. He came to the table on a Wednesday and told Renee he was leaving Saturday. He was holding it together the way teenage boys hold things together, with his jaw, his hands flat on the table to keep them still, and she did not make him say more than he could say. She let the quiet sit. She did not fill it with the things adults fill such quiets with, the "it will be all right" and the "you will be fines," because she had been a child sent somewhere once herself, and she knew those words landed like stones on a boy already carrying too many. She did the only thing she could think to do. She went to the hall closet and he heard her moving. The boxes, the cardboard dragging on the shelf, and she came back with the one with his name on the lid in her careful block letters, and she set it on the table between them and lifted the lid. Years of his work were in there, the handwriting steadying page by page, and she did not go through all of it. She went straight to the bottom, to the first one, and she put it in his hands. The pizza cut into fractions, with her writing at the top. Exactly right. She told him to keep it somewhere he could find it. She told him that when he forgot he was smart, and he would forget, everyone forgets. He should take it out and look at it, and remember that a teacher once looked at his work and told him the truth. He asked her, in a voice that cracks down the middle of the word, why she was giving it to him and not keeping it. She told him she did not need it to remember him. She told him he was the one who was going to need reminding. Out there among strangers who had not watched him learn, he took it. He folded it once carefully along a crease that already existed, and he put it in the inside pocket of the too big coat his grandmother had gotten from the church bin, the same coat he had worn the first day, and he hugged her hard and fast the way boys do when they are afraid that a long hug will undo them. And then he was gone. She did not hear from him again. She did not expect to. A room is for leaving, and she had taught him to leave well. And leaving well sometimes means not looking back. For 19 years, she did not know what became of Darnell Brooks. She thought about him, the way she thought about all of them, in the small hours with a shoebox open on her lap. She hoped he had landed somewhere soft. She had no way of knowing. The cousin's number had changed. The aunt had moved. The threads of a poor family scatter and do not always come back together, and a tutor at a kitchen table is not owed an ending to anyone's story. She made her peace with the not knowing. She had to. The alternative was to spend her nights aching over every child the world had swallowed, and a woman cannot live that way and still set down sandwiches in the morning. She kept teaching. That was the thing. Through all of it, through the rent and the cut hours and the oatmeal Februaries and the knees, she kept the table set and the chalkboard up and the coffee can full of sharpened pencils. New children came. Halsey Street did not run out of children who needed somebody. The faces changed and the fractions stayed the same, and Renee Carter taught the children of the children she had taught, and was old now and tired and had stopped, somewhere in there, expecting anything for herself. She was not bitter about it. Expecting nothing is not the same as bitterness. It is closer to rest. She had decided that her reward, if she ever got one, would be the quiet kind, the kind you only know about yourself, and she had made that be enough. Which is why the knock undid her so completely. She had stopped waiting for anything to come back, and then something came back in a charcoal suit at 7 in the morning, with wet eyes and a leather folder it would not put down. Inside, she sat him at the kitchen table. Of course she did. There was nowhere else to put a child of hers, and the table was where children of hers belonged, even when they were 35 and taller than the doorframe. She put the kettle on. Her hands knew the motions without her. She set a mug in front of him and asked if he still took it with too much sugar, and he laughed, a wet, broken laugh, because she had remembered, after all these years she had remembered the sugar, and the remembering was almost more than he could hold. He said yes. He said he had never been able to drink it any other way, and that every time he made coffee too sweet in dorm rooms and apartments and the break rooms of buildings, she would not believe he had thought of her. He told her where he had been. The cousin 300 miles away had not been kind, but had not been cruel either. Just a tired man with no extra room in his heart, and Darnell had spent 2 years sleeping on a fold-out couch and keeping his head down and his grades up. The grades were the thing. He had kept the worksheet, the pizza one, taped inside the cover of a notebook, and on the nights when the new school looked at him like the old one had, like a problem to be moved to the back, he had taken it out and read her writing. Exactly right. He told her that worksheet had gotten him through high school. He said it the way you say a thing you have never told anyone. Fast and then ashamed of how much it mattered. There was a teacher at the new school, eventually, who saw something the way Renee had taught him to let himself be seen. There was a community college and then a scholarship to a 4-year school that he had filled out the application for at a kitchen table, not unlike this one in the cousin's house late at night. There was a degree in accounting, of all things, because the boy who had been terrified of fractions had grown into a man who found a deep and unexpected peace in the honesty of numbers, in the way a column either balanced or did not, in the way the world, on a ledger at least, kept its promises. He said that to her almost shyly. He said he had become an accountant because she had once told him that the world keeps a ledger even when people do not, and he had wanted his whole life to be one of the people who kept it. Renee had to put her own mug down then. Her hand was not steady. She had said that sentence to 100 children and never once imagined one of them would build a life on it. He was not just an accountant now. He told her this part carefully because he could see it was a lot, because he was a man who had learned to deliver large numbers gently. He was a partner. He ran the kind of firm that had its name on the side of a building downtown. A building, it turned out, that Renee had cleaned. He did not say that to wound her. He said it because it was the truth, and the truth was the whole point of his being there. For 3 years while he was building that firm, the night cleaning crew that emptied his wastebaskets and wiped his glass and ran the vacuum past his office door had included a grey-haired woman he never saw because he was always gone by the time the crew came and she was always gone by the time he arrived. And the city is built so that the people who clean it and the people who fill it never have to look at each other. He had been in that building. She had been in that building. They had missed each other by an hour every night for 3 years. He had found out, by accident. That was the part that broke him, telling it. A new office manager, going through old vendor records to trim costs, had flagged the cleaning contract for review and left the roster on his desk with the rest of the week's paper. Darnell read every record that crossed his desk because that was who he was, the man who balanced the column nobody else wanted to look at, and he had seen a name on the employee roster. Carter R. He had stared at it over the rim of his coffee. Coffee he still made too sweet. It was a common name. It meant nothing. Except that something in him, some 11-year-old still sitting at a table somewhere with a sandwich and a pencil, had refused to let it mean nothing, and he had walked down to the office manager and asked as casually as he could manage how long the cleaning vendor had held the contract and who worked the overnight floor. 3 years, came the answer. He had sat back down. He had made a call to the vendor he could not quite explain to himself and asked a question and waited 2 days for the answer, and the answer had come back, and the answer was her. The woman who had cleaned his office for 3 years was the woman who had taught him that his mind was worth something. He had been paying her through a contract, through a vendor line item, $11 an hour to scrub the floors of the kingdom she had built him. He thought of all the nights he had left his lamp on and his work spread out, and the grey-haired woman who must have squared his papers without reading them, wiped the ring his cup left, run the vacuum past the door of an office that existed because of her, and gone home on the late bus an hour after he had gone home in the car. They had missed each other by an hour every night for 3 years, and the city was built so they never had to meet. He could not stop crying when he got to that part. Neither by then could she, though she cried, the way she did everything, quietly, with her hands folded, as if even her grief did not wish to be a burden. That was 3 weeks ago, he told her. He had not come right away. He had sat with it the way you sit with a number too large to be real, turning it, distrusting it. He had gone back through the old box of his own things, the things he had carried from couch to dorm to apartment, and never once unpacked all the way, and he had found the worksheet, still taped inside the cover of a spiral notebook, gone soft at the corners, and he had looked at her handwriting for a long time at his own kitchen table, in his own good kitchen, with the city lit up behind him. Exactly right. And then he had done the thing an accountant does when he is trying to understand the true size of a debt. He had sat down with a legal pad and a sharp pencil and tried to count it. 5 years of Tuesdays, the sandwiches, 2 slices and a spoon of peanut butter, multiply it out across the weeks, across the children. The pencils she sharpened by hand, the chalkboard she bought, used for $9. The job that was really dignity, the erasing and the counting in. From the stoop, the worksheet that got him through high school, the sentence that built his whole career. He put numbers next to each line, real numbers, hourly rates and market values, the way he would for any client, and then he sat and looked at the column and he crossed it all out, line by line, because there was no number. The thing she had given him could not be counted or sold, and he had become a man whose entire profession was counting, and he had finally found the one debt that would not fit on a ledger, and it humbled him in a way no audit ever had. So he had stopped trying to repay it because it could not be repaid, and he had decided instead to do the only honest thing, which was to come and tell her the truth and let the truth do what it would. That was what was in the leather folder. Not a check, though there would be a check, and it would be a large one, and she would protest it, and he would not budge. The folder held something else. He opened it on her kitchen table, on the same scarred wood where he had once drawn a pizza into fractions, and he turned it so she could see. It was a worksheet, hers, photocopied and enlarged and matted behind glass, the pizza cut into 8 even pieces, the shaky pencil of an 11-year-old. And at the top, in her own careful block letters, 2 words. Exactly right. He had had it framed. That was not all the folder held, though. Behind the framed worksheet were papers, real papers, the kind an accountant draws up when he means a thing and intends it to stand. He had established something. A foundation, he called it, though he said the word almost apologetically, as if it were too big a word for what it really was, which was simpler. It was money set aside, enough of it, professionally managed, with one purpose and her name on it. The Renee Carter Fund, the papers said, for the tutoring of neighborhood children, at no cost, forever. She did not understand at first. She read the papers the way you read something in a language you used to know. He explained it slowly, the way she had once explained fractions to him, breaking the large, frightening thing into pieces small enough to hold. The duplex she rented, the whole duplex, both halves, was bought and paid for, and was hers deeded in her name, so that no landlord would ever raise the rent on the table again. The back half would become a real space, with real desks and real books and heat that worked, and she would never clean an office again unless she wished to, and there would be money every year, forever, to feed the children and buy the pencils and pay. For the first time in her life, the woman who set down the sandwiches, he had thought of everything. He was an accountant, thinking if everything was the love language he had taught himself when the other ones were taken away. Renee Carter sat at her table and held the framed worksheet of a child who had grown into the man across from her, and for a long moment she could not speak at all. When she did speak, she did not say thank you, not first. First she reached across the table and put her hand against his face, the way you check a child for fever, the way you make sure a thing in front of you is real. Then she said the only thing that was true enough to say. She said she had always wondered what became of him. She said she had hoped he landed somewhere soft. And he turned his face into her palm, this partner, this man whose name was on a building, and he was 11 again for just a second, fed and seen and told the truth, and he said the softest place he ever landed was right here, at this table. And he had spent his whole life trying to build something half as good and had only ever managed to build it out of money. The check, when she finally looked at it, had a number on it that made no sense to her hands. She read it twice, and then a third time, certain she had miscounted the zeros, and she had not. She tried to give it back. She slid it across the scarred wood toward him with 2 fingers. The way you return something that has been handed to you by mistake. He had known she would. He let her try, and he did not take it, and he kept his hands in his lap, and eventually she stopped sliding it, because she understood, dimly, that refusing it would be a way of telling him that what he had to give did not matter, and she had spent 5 years teaching him that what he had to give mattered very much. So she let him give it. She folded her hands on top of it and let it stay. That was its own kind of grace. The letting. Some people only know how to give, and the hardest lesson of their lives is learning how to receive, without shrinking, without apology, without trying to make themselves small enough to deserve it. Renee learned that lesson the same morning at 51 at her own kitchen table, from a man she had taught to add word got around, the way it does on a street where everyone knows everyone. Camille from the library came by first, on her lunch hour, still in the cardigan she wore at the circulation desk, and she stood in the doorway and looked at Renee, and could not get the first word out for a moment. Then came Marcus, who spoke slow and sure, and Tasha with a baby on her hip now, and even Curtis, who had been pun, grown into a wide, quiet man who worked at the transit yard. They came not because of the money. The money was just the noise that had finally made the street look. They came because the door was open and the kettle was on, and the woman who had been of use to all of them was, for once, sitting still and letting herself be tended. They filled her front room past its capacity, leaning on the walls, sitting on the arms of the couch, and they told stories on each other and on themselves. Camille reminded the room that she could not read at 9 and would hide in the bathroom at school during reading time, and that Renee had not made her feel slow once, not once had just started her on comic books because the pictures gave the words somewhere to land. Marcus tapped the table to show them how she had taught him to slow his stutter, once for each word, and the whole room tapped along and laughed, and there was something in the laughing that was very close to crying. Curtis said quietly that she was the first person who ever wrote his real name down like it was worth writing. And the room went still at that, because every one of them had a version of it, the small free thing she had set down years ago without counting. Renee sat in the middle of it with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes bright and wet, and she understood finally the size of the thing she had built. She had thought she was setting down sandwiches. She had been raising a neighborhood. The back half of the duplex opened the next spring as a real tutoring room, with desks that did not wobble and a wall of books and a coffee can of sharpened pencils kept exactly as it had always been. Because some things you do not improve, you only protect. The contractors had wanted to throw the old chalkboard out and put in something new that slid and gleamed. And Renee had told them no, the $9 board stayed. And they had cleaned it and rehung it, and it was the first thing a child saw walking in. There was a small sign on the door, hand-lettered. Because Renee would not allow anything fancier, it said, "Come in, there is room at the table." And there always was, the only rule of the house that ever mattered. Darnell came back often, on Saturdays mostly, in jeans now instead of the suit, and he would set his keys on the counter and roll up his sleeves and sit at a desk too small for him, and help a nervous 9-year-old understand that a fraction is just a pizza, that the whole secret is seeing the pieces. He had a way with the scared ones. He knew the inside of their fear from the inside, and they trusted him faster than they trusted anyone, and Renee would watch him from the window seat with something settled in her chest, and at the top of a child's first finished worksheet he would write, in block letters he had practiced for weeks to make them look like hers. The only 2 words worth writing. Exactly right. She kept the framed worksheet on the windowsill above the table, where the morning light came through, the same light that had been coming through the morning he knocked. Sometimes a new child would ask about it, the pizza behind the glass, the shaky pencil, and Renee would tell them it belonged to a boy who used to be afraid of fractions and grew up to count the whole world. She never told them the rest, the building, the fund, the number on the check. That was not the part that mattered. The part that mattered was the sandwich and a sentence and the worksheet. The small, free things she had set down for years without counting, and how they had come back, all of them, in the hands of a man in a suit who only ever wanted to sit at the table again. If you have ever had someone who saw you when you were small and afraid and certain you were nothing, someone who told you that something in your head was exactly right and made you believe it, then you already understand why a grown man would cry on a stoop, and why a tired woman would put her hand against his face before she said a single word about the money. Tell me about that person if you had one. And if you have not heard a story like this in a while, stay close, because there is another one about a different door and a different debt waiting for you when this one ends. Renee Carter lived 11 more years. She taught nearly to the end of them in the warm back room with the desks that did not wobble, and when she could no longer teach, she sat by the window in the morning light and watched the children at the table and corrected them gently when they needed it and praised them when they did not. The street took care of her the way she had taught it to take care of its own. There was always somebody on the stoop with a covered dish, always a grown child who had once been a small one, stopping by to fix a thing she had not asked to be fixed. She was never alone and she was never hungry, and on the last morning when the light came through the window and fell across the framed worksheet on the sill, the pizza cut into 8 even pieces, and the 2 words at the top, she was sitting at the table where she belonged, with a coffee made just slightly too sweet. The way a boy had taught her to make it after she had taught him everything else. The kettle was warm, the pencils were sharp, the door was open, and there was room.